let's imagine none of this is true. We're still going to learn something about why people have out-of-body experiences or think they're in telepathic contact with their loved ones or go to a medium and think they've contacted the dead. We're going to learn something interesting about psychology. And that's true of magic. When you study magicians and how they manipulate attention and all sorts of other things, you're learning about psychology. And people are fascinated by this stuff. What psychologists are really good at, academic psychologists, is taking people who I find very interesting and our lives and emotions, and we laugh and we hate and we have beliefs that aren't true, and we argue with people and we get on with people and so on, taking all of that buzzing complexity and reducing it to something really quite dull. And so I that saddens me. And a lot of my work is about trying to celebrate the role of people in society and keep psychology interesting. I mean, that's why I got into it in the first place. I read these things, and yet psychologists have this rather uncanny ability to take something that's interesting and convert it into something quite dull.
Hello, and welcome to the Psychology Podcast. I'm Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, a cognitive scientist interested in the science of intelligence, creativity, and human potential. Today we have Dr. Richard Wiseman on the podcast. Dr. Wiseman holds Britain's only professorship in the public understanding of psychology at the University of Hertfordshire and has published over 100 academic papers examining the psychology of magic and illusion, deception, luck, and self-development. Dr. Wiseman has written several popular psychology books, including The Luck Factor, Paranormality, Why We See What Isn't There, Quirkology, Shoot for the Moon, and Rip It Up, the radically new approach to changing your life. I've been a longtime admirer of Dr. Wiseman's wide-ranging research on magic, well-being, and success in life. As you will see in this episode, we share a lot of mutual interests. I really enjoyed chatting with Dr. Wiseman, and I know you will enjoy listening to our discussion. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. Richard Wiseman. Professor Richard Wiseman, it is so good to have you on the Psychology Podcast, finally.
Pleasure to be here, and greetings from a not very sunny Edinburgh in Scotland, which is where I find myself.
It's not sunny, but I do love Edinburgh. I love it.
It's a very, very beautiful city, and I'm lucky enough to live right in the middle of it. So yeah. Every year the Fringe Festival rolls into town, and thousands of shows all over the city. But right now it's a fairly quiet time, particularly as it's quite late at night.
Wonderful. Well, we have so many areas of mutual interest. I have a great interest in magic and a great interest. I see you on the Facebook groups I'm on, and I'm like, oh, there's Richard Wiseman. The secret magic groups. Won't mention what any of them are called.
Yes, the interconnected world of magic. Yeah, it's a remarkably small world. It's incredible.
It is remarkably small, and everyone's trying to make sure that we keep the secrets, but also psychology and the psychology of success. That's a very very common area of interest. Not common. That's a mutual area of interest of ours. Is maybe some of the we're going to talk today about some of the unexpected things that people might not realize really matters for success, and maybe we'll talk about some of the things that everyone says matters for success and maybe doesn't matter so much. So that'd be great to have that conversation. So that's all just preamble, just setting the stage,
letting people know what's going to happen. Yes, it's very important. Right. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you're a lifelong entertainer, so I want to start there a little bit to your childhood, because you were a street performer when you were like 12?
No, a little bit older than that. I got into magic when I was probably 8 or 9, something like that, and via my grandfather, who showed me a very good magic trick. He only knew one magic trick, but it was a very good one. A coin that would disappear and appear in a little sort of nest of boxes. And so I kind of badgered him every weekend to tell me how this trick was done. He wouldn't do that. Eventually he said the secret's in the local library. So I went over and read everything about magic, and that's how I got hooked on it. And it is an amazing hobby. I mean, I've just written a book on all the kind of benefits of learning magic, and they are sizable, in terms of confidence, in terms of problem solving, getting a can-do attitude, and so on. So I got into magic, got into a local magic club, and then went to study psychology because of magic. Actually, I read a book that said it's handy if magicians are likable. And so therefore you should read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which is an amazing book. I mean, it's dated now, but it's incredible. That and How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, his other book, both of them incredible. So I read those. Then went and studied psychology at University College London, which is right in the middle of London. And the reason for that is that it's very close to the Magic Circle and also very close to Covent Garden, which is an area in London where all the street entertainers are. And so in my sort of summer breaks, I would go and do street entertaining down there, I guess then in my sort of early teens. And I was pretty awful. I was pretty bad at it. It's a hard way of making a living because people can walk off. You know, if they don't like what you're doing, they wander off. And they did in large numbers when I was doing street entertaining. So I did that. And then, we'll probably talk about sort of, as you say, success. But in terms of opportunity, you know, most of the opportunities that have come my way have been by chance. And so at the end of my degree, I was walking along. My friend was walking in the opposite direction and bumped into him. And he said, you know, that's the weirdest thing. I've just seen this poster for a PhD position, which would be perfect for you, studying the psychology of magic up in Edinburgh. And I often think, well, you know, if somebody hadn't put that poster up, or he hadn't walked that route, or I hadn't walked the route and bumped into him, I wouldn't have known about that opportunity. This is all prior to email and so on, and the web. And so this was a professor up in Edinburgh who was doing work on the paranormal, wanted a magician. And so I came up to here and studied psychology and magic for 4 years. That's my PhD. And then after that, went back down to University of Hertfordshire and did some of the research, which I suspect you may have read about. So that's my kind of career in terms of magic and psychology coming together.
I love it. What was the name of your advisor?
Up here is Professor Robert Morris, who was the Kersler Professor of Parapsychology. So Bob was, I don't know if he believed in paranormal stuff or not. He was certainly very open to it. But he also knew that lots of the psychics and mediums and so on were cheats. And he wanted someone to do some work on psychology and magic so he could sort of separate the two out. And what was amazing about that experience, I was working in a parapsychology unit, which is the psychology of the paranormal. Now, I'm skeptical about that stuff. Most magicians are. I was deeply skeptical. And yet I was surrounded by people who kind of believed that stuff. And I think it's very healthy to be working in an area and to meet people whose belief systems you don't share, because it kind of teaches you how to be tolerant and respectful when you don't agree with somebody. So it set me in a good kind of stead for that. So yeah, that was Bob Morris up here. And that was 4 glorious years doing psychology and magic stuff.
That's so cool. I feel like the psychology of the paranormal is a very fringe area of psychology. When I go to the APA conferences, I just don't meet many paranormal psychologists.
No, that's definitely true. Yeah, there's probably when I was doing it, it's probably about 50 people. Now there's probably about 20 people around the world. So yes, it's not an area that attracts many people.
It's not an area that attracts many people yet. Like, if there is something to this, then like it's like the most important thing. That's the interesting thing about this is like it's you know, it's the most fringe area. But let's say a psychologist does someday actually find something that replicates within the paranormal, because yet no one's replicating this shit. But let's say someone actually replicates. Well, then it's like, wait a minute, hold on, maybe we should now focus on this.
Yeah, no, that's true. It has the opportunity or the possibility of revolutionizing exactly how we see the mind and so on. But you do need evidence, good evidence. I don't believe that evidence is there for extrasensory perception. But Bob's argument, even back then, this would have been the late 80s, early 90s, his argument was, I think it's true, let's imagine none of this is true. We're still going to learn something about why people have out-of-body experiences or think they're in telepathic contact with their loved ones or go to a medium and think they've contacted the dead. We're going to learn something interesting about psychology. And that's true of magic. You know, when you study magicians and how they manipulate attention and all sorts of other things, you're learning about psychology. And people are fascinated by this stuff. What psychologists are really good at, academic psychologists, is taking people who I find very interesting and our lives and emotions, and we laugh and we hate and we have beliefs that aren't true, and we argue with people and then we get on with people and so on, taking all of that buzzing complexity and reducing it to something really quite dull. And so that saddens me. And a lot of my work is about trying to celebrate the role of people in society and keep psychology interesting. I mean, that's why I got into it in the first place. I read these things, and yet psychologists have this rather uncanny ability to take something that's interesting and convert it into something quite dull.
You're so right. I mean, you're the professor of public understanding at your University of Hertfordshire.
Yes.
Hertfordshire. And you literally, I've never heard of that. Maybe Richard Dawkins, the only other time I've ever heard of someone who was a professor of like public, why the public should care about something. Maybe you and him.
Richard started it. He was public understanding of science, I think.
Right.
And then when I got my professorship, I went with public understanding of psychology because it allowed me to move in many different spheres. But also, fundamentally, people should be so honored and excited to study psychology. And when I first speak to undergraduates on their first day in the university, they're all excited. And then when you speak to them in year 3 or year 4, they've kind of lost that excitement and it's all become a little bit dull. And I think that's because psychology is quite a lot of it isn't very interesting. So I always think we should remember why we're doing this stuff and how wonderful brains are, how wonderful minds are. We've got no idea how the brain creates the mind. We don't really have very much an idea of how brains work. And we're still only scratching the surface in terms of the complexity and getting our heads around that. So, I always sort of choose topics that I find interesting and that I think other people will find interesting for that reason. I don't do much work on, short-term memory because I would find it difficult to bring that alive.
But you did write a book on helping people with their memory
I
techniques.
did. I'd forgotten about that. Yes, I didn't.
That's ironic. Yeah, that's ironic.
It's crazy. Yes. So I wrote a short book on memory. But again, it was about how to improve your memory.
Right.
It wasn't about the intricacies of how memory systems work.
Long term. Well,
exactly.
LTM, not
That's
STM.
right. That's it.
I know I definitely find the topics you study interesting for sure. I remember it's just a shame in psychology that we don't in grad school promote people more or encourage students who want to do public outreach of their science. When I was in grad school, I started blogging for Psychology Today right when that blog network started, and my advisor called me into his office and he's like, "We need to talk. This is you're really out there, in this department for doing this, and you realize this is going to hurt your chances at tenure." And it turns out he was right. I'm not tenured yet, but
that was true of me when I finished my parapsychology stuff in 92. I was looking for a job. It turns out nobody wants to employ a parapsychologist or somebody who's done work, and so it is that is totally true, that the system is set up for a certain type of psychology where you publish in certain types of journals and get certain types of grants. And if you're going to sit outside of that, it can be quite challenging. Yeah. But that the key question to me is why you're doing anything, quite frankly. What makes something meaningful? And when you ask that to psychologists, their answer is, well, because I publish journal articles and I get grants. That's the end point. The end point isn't to understand or to celebrate humanity.
Right.
And so the number of times people are confused when you go, well, let's just forget about the articles and the why are you studying this? And people psychologists look kind of a bit bewildered and go, no, I'm just doing it because that's to get those publications, get those grants. That's how you get on. So, I think it would be nice if there was a dramatic change in my lifetime of encouraging people to think about why they're doing what they're doing and what is meaningful.
Well, that would be nice. Wouldn't that be nice? Sign me up for that club. I view you as part of a tradition of that includes James Randi, the amazing Randi, and includes Banachek, but it's a smaller club than that because you're a psychologist who is formally. I mean, I put you in this sort of tradition because James Randi tried to test to see is some of this bullshit. But he didn't really do rigorous double blind. Like he did made for TV. Look, I'm going to show you how I'm smarter than you. That you're dumb, that you lied, and that look, I'm the amazing Randy. But with all due respect, I have a lot of respect for him. But that's what the TV show is about.
Yeah. I mean, we have to say, no, I'm not quite the same as that. I mean,
you're not like, look at me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I suppose in terms of going back, I'd probably close to Ray Hyman, Jim Alcock, people like that who were and still are doing that kind of work within psychology. We should say, though, Randy, who and I knew James very well, was an amazing guy. I mean, he was the amazing Randy. But he's amazing in many, many ways. And one is he just was very charismatic, very clear thinking, very bright, and had a great ability to take skepticism and make it exciting on the media. And that is not an easy thing to do. I mean, it's more exciting to talk about why ghosts are real than why they may not exist. But James could bring that alive, that famous line of people prefer the bunk to the debunk, where he was able to overcome that. And he was great. And some of his investigations are very brave as well. He went after people that he knew were going to kind of come back at him. So, he was good. Big fan of his work. Banachek is wonderful as well. Really sort of talented. Have you ever seen Banachek doing the spoon bending, which I saw in Vegas a few years ago? My goodness, it's really good. It's really, really good. But you are right. My roots, I suppose, because they're in academia, would be closer to people like Ray Hyman, Jim Alcock, who come more from that kind of tradition.
And I was very, careful in what I said, because I could have easily just put you in the camp of, you come from the tradition of Daryl Bem, but I don't feel like you come from the tradition of Daryl Bem in a sense, because in one sense, yes, because you're both rigorous scientists, right? But another sense is that I feel like you're even more critical of it than he is. But
I mean, Daryl's not particularly critical now. I mean, he started off, I think, being quite skeptical. He's a very good magician. Was actually taught, I think, by Sladini and does some great magic.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think that's right. Certainly, I've seen him do Sladini, which we should explain to people is a very particular type of magic. I've seen him do those sorts of routines. And Daryl's great. Published parapsychological papers suggesting there was something to it in mainstream journals.
Right.
And inadvertently kicked off the current crisis in replication in psychology, because people looked at those articles, started to criticize his research, saying, maybe he looked at the data before he analyzed it, or he's not reporting everything, or whatever it is. And then other people went, hold on a minute, that may be true of that parapsychological work, but it's also true of a lot of psychology as well. And so that kicked off this whole kind of, we need to be able to replicate and need to look critically at our own studies. And now that's become a huge movement. And because of that movement, psychologists now are talking about a thing called pre-registration, which is where you write down what you're going to do, the way in which you're going to analyze data and so on before you conduct the study. And the full circle on it is that parapsychologists were doing that for 15 years, many, many years ago. I mean, probably 20 years ago now, they ran those sorts of systems because they knew there were problems with the data. So it's another way to which parapsychology can kind of overlap with psychology. Yeah,
just on a nerdy note, pre-registration is kind of like mentalism. I mean, aren't they making a prediction? We predict this will be our hypothesis.
Correct. That's right. Yes, but unlike mentalism, it's quite hard to change that prediction.
That's right. That's right.
It's an attempt to kind of sort out.
But if it goes right, then it looks impressive.
You make a big fuss. That's right. Yeah. So Daryl contributed to that, and actually, weirdly, there's another overlap there, because before he got into parapsychology, Daryl was doing stuff on self-perception theory, which is this notion that you figure out how you feel by looking at how you're acting. So it's this idea that if you force your face into a smile, then you cheer yourself up because you look at yourself and think, I'm smiling, I must be happy. And he did some great work on that, quite early work. And then one of my books was entirely about self-perception theory, the Rip It Up book called The As If Principle in the States. So I interviewed Daryl for that. when I did that book. It was odd talking to him entirely about that and not about parapsychology, because that's how I knew him. But no, he's great.
Have you ever talked to him about because you wrote you have a study, right, that found it didn't replicate? Weren't you an author on that, a co-author?
Yeah. We didn't replicate stuff. No, I've spoken to Daryl, but we did summer schools together in America on parapsychology, so I know him reasonably well. And
very cool.
This is what I mean. Within parapsychology, I don't see eye to eye with most parapsychologists in terms of whether this stuff is true, but you just have to sit down in the room and have a conversation with somebody without shouting.
I agree.
And that's a useful skill. I mean, we all know about confirmation bias. We love to surround ourselves with people that agree with us. And I mean, going back to success, I know, I'm not going to name them, I know two very, very famous magicians, and I went to see their shows, and I go and see them afterwards. I'm not going to say who it is. And each of them said to me, "What do you think of the show?" And so there's always this tradition that you say nice things about someone's show. And I said, "I enjoyed this." And both of them cut me dead. I said, "Never mind about that. What did you hate? What can I change tomorrow?" And they were at the top of their game, and all they're interested in is, what can I change? How can I improve? And it's an odd skill. It's something that we don't embrace easily, as saying to somebody, "Yeah, but how can I get better? What do you disagree with about what I'm doing? Not what do you agree with?" We all want to be surrounded by people that go, "Oh, you're wonderful, you're great." Actually, you learn far more from the people that go, "Yeah, not for me." So that was always an important lesson.
Well, that's an important lesson about success. I mean, and if you look at anyone who's really successful, you look at even famous basketball players. I feel like that was Kobe Bryant's mentality. It was like always wanting to change and improve.
It's hard to do, though. It's easy to say and hard to do. And I've done shows. You meet people afterwards, and you love it when they go, "Oh my goodness, that was great and that was funny." It's really hard to go, "Yeah. What didn't you like? What can I do better?" It's hard to do. It's easy to say and hard to do.
It's true, especially the more personal the comment is.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no, for sure. So where are we at with the evidence on this? So I try to look at, I started with your 99 paper, Does psi exist? PSI, how's it pronounced?
Psi, yeah.
Psi, yeah. Does psi exist? Lack of replication of an anomalous process of information transfer. I saw your eyes, by the way, try to think all the way back to 99. That was my reading.
Well, this happens a lot. Okay, what's about to happen happens a lot now, which is somebody asked me the other day about a book that I'd written, and I'd written in the kind of mid-90s, and I was thinking, I can't remember, and I don't even remember writing the book, let alone the contents of it. So yeah, particularly with papers like that. But I do remember that. That's the meta-analysis. The
studies, just in case you forgot, I wrote a sentence from the abstract. The studies failed to confirm his main effect of participants scoring above chance on the ESP task. So you looked at a whole bunch of. Now that was before the BEM. The one that made the big splash, right? Which was more recent.
No, I think that is.
Was that? That was a direct replication of that.
Now we are getting into stuff I can't remember. So I thought that paper that you got there. What's the title of it again?
Does psi exist? Lack of replication of an anomalous process of information transfer.
Yeah, that's the meta-analysis of the Ganzfeld stuff. Yeah, the BEM stuff is about feeling the future, which was much later on. So that was about the Yes, that's right. So that one, I think, if I'm right, is about meta-analysis, where you put lots of studies together, and when we put them together, we found a kind of null effect. And then there was lots and lots of endless debate about that paper. I think it's still one of my most cited papers because so many people disagreed with it and got into arguments about it. So it's a very contentious paper. And actually, one of the reasons why I left the field, I don't do much parapsychology now, because it was so unpleasant to be consistently opening your email, and there's like criticism and an argument, and I was going to conferences and arguing about it. And after a while, I was just thinking, I don't really want to spend my entire life arguing about this stuff. And then that's where I moved into the luck work and some of the more sort of positive aspects of change. Because after about 10, 12 years in parapsychology, I thought I'd said everything that I needed to say. And you know, like religion, these beliefs really do matter to some people. And so the debates do get quite heated sometimes.
It does. And, you know, there's such a popularity right now of the telepathy tapes, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know anything about them other than, I haven't listened to them or anything like that. But isn't it amazing that this stuff, you know, so the unsinkable rubber duck hypothesis, you know, you keep on batting it down, it keeps on coming back in different forms.
Yeah, well, you do keep batting it down. You took on their Gangsfeld ESP studies. Can you just describe the methodology of a Gangsfeld ESP study so someone listening can know what is, how do we test for this stuff?
Okay, so testing for this stuff is complicated. With a Gansfeld, you normally, not always, but normally you're doing sender-receiver telepathy type study. You take one person and you put them with sort of into a Gansfeld state. You put half ping pong balls over their eyes, you put white noise into their ears, you put a red light into their face, and it allows them to turn their attention inwards, and they talk about the thoughts and images that come to mind for whatever it is, 20 minutes. In another room, you have what's called the sender, who's given a randomly selected video clip or picture to look at. And then at the end of the day, you look at the correspondence between that clip and what was being said by the receiver. And I won't go into the stats of it, but you should get about 25% hits. 1 in 4 of those trials should be what's called a hit. When you run those studies, some people getting 32%, 35%. And that was statistically significant, i.e. it suggested that psychic ability existed. Our analysis didn't show that. And that's where it all started to get a little bit nasty. But, you know, Gansfeld studies are still going on and the debate is still going on.
Oh, the debate is still very much going on. And
yes.
People will keep pointing out to me, but what about J.B. Ryan's work? What about J.B., you know, and I read Reach of the Mind. It's actually one of my favorite books. I have it on my bookshelf. Whenever I do my ESP Mentalism, I give a whole story about, you know, this is actually how they tested for this. And the argument I keep getting from the scientists who are also believers, you know, is that, you know, just meta-analysis doesn't invalidate, you know, the ones that like it, we did find it, like we saw it with our own eyes, you know, like you can't, like no meta-analysis can strike that from the record. So I find it hard, like to do what to do with that. Like, how could we ever progress as a field if we're just arguing meta-analysis versus those who are like, but I found the effect at one point just because, you know, on average it's chance doesn't mean that we didn't find it.
Yeah. So if I understand your question correctly, it's how you I mean, a lot of parapsychologists have had personal experience of this stuff. So they've had an experience which they think proves psi. And after that, they're out to prove it. And experiments are a way of doing that and investigating this alleged ability. So, but I think one has to park that and argue it on the evidence. And one of the things that parapsychology shows us is evidence can be a bit squishier than we thought. And just arguing on evidence can get problematic. So, you know, Bem did his studies that we spoke about earlier on. Since then, he's tried to replicate it, quite rightly, with 2 large-scale replications that haven't worked. And so the evidence for that doesn't look so good. But that's what we have to fall back on. And the scientific method, particularly in psychology, isn't very accurate. You know, it's squishy. There will be errors. What we believe today, we're probably not going to believe in 6 months, a year's time. You know, as those models of the mind get better and better, we hope, more and more accurate, we'll make errors along the way. And we just must get better at dealing with the uncertainties of evidence. People like certainty. They like to know that, you know, X or Y is going to happen. It's not like that in psychology. You know, it's a place where ambiguity thrives. And it's only really over time, when you've got enough evidence collected under certain conditions, you can make certain conclusions. But it will take some time.
Yeah, but I don't even know if there's anything you would find evidence-wise that would convince the believers
Yeah, I mean, it has to be true. As we said, the same might be true of the skeptics. No matter what evidence you give them, sometimes they won't change.
I'm glad you said that. Glad you said that too.
We like our entrenched positions. And it probably, whenever I was doing that stuff, public stuff, I was always seeing it like a kind of curve where you had the extreme believers one end, extreme skeptics the other. You're probably not going to change their minds. But there's a lot of people in the middle who haven't made up their minds, and they're the people that you're trying to inform as accurately as you can.
Yeah.
But it will take time. I mean, this, J.P. Ryan was 1930s, 1940s. We're almost 100 years on from that. We're still having the same debates. But we'll slowly get there, as you will with all psychology.
We will. And I appreciate your very rigorous research. I really liked your paper, Think of a Card. I like the title. A retrospective analysis. The subtitle is a little more boring, but a retrospective analysis of a classic ESP experiment from 2021. You found the results do not provide evidence for psychic functioning, but they do suggest, and I want to know that data, that the public's preference for particular playing cards has remained fairly stable. So I always hear from my fellow magicians, females like Queen of Hearts and men love Ace of Spades. Is that still true?
I don't know. We did a gender split there. But what we were showing there was that somebody did a very similar thing in the 20s. I think Society for Psychical Research did it, where they asked lots of people to name a playing card. So we had that data. And then we also had the data from much more recent studies. And it turns out pretty much the same. So preferences, population stereotypes, if you like, for playing cards haven't changed over that time. The problem it gives magicians is, you are right, that when you say name a card, people tend to say Queen of Hearts, Ace of Spades.
Yeah.
But the issue is that I think people also know they're commonly called cards. And so there's almost no point in predicting them or using them in a trick. I mean, you want to get things impressive. You want to say name a card, but don't make it an obvious one like Ace of Spades or Queen of Hearts. At least you've taken out that avenue, because as you know, good magic, there's lots of different methods, and to get a really good effect, you need to take out all of those methods. And with mentalism, I bet everyone says that is one of those kind of methods.
So this is you really are consistently finding in lots of different methodologies, lots of different ways, there really is not a psychic effect. But you do find some things that I still think are extraordinarily interesting, maybe just as interesting, and that's that people who do believe in supernatural phenomena tend to have certain personality characteristics or certain psychological attributes. I love that you did a whole review of this. Can you talk? You did extensive. You looked at intelligence, like cognitive ability, critical thinking, belief in psychic ability. What is the type of person? Can you just outline the type of person who really kind of sees the supernatural everywhere they look?
Yeah, it's not just myself. Lots of people have looked at that literature and continue to look at it. The cognitive stuff, certainly in terms of, if you want to use the word intelligence or IQ, doesn't tend to bear out. What tends to be more accurate is it's people who are high on hypnotic susceptibility, so they make good hypnosis subjects. They're high on imagination. They're intuitive thinkers. They score high on what's called openness, which is sort of a measure of creativity. That's what tends to cluster around belief in the paranormal. And that kind of makes sense, because to make the paranormal attribution, you have to be quite open to something which isn't really sort of, widely believed in Western society, at least. And second, you're often making a connection between two events. So if you have a dream and then the following day something happens, you have to see some kind of correspondence between that dream and what happened. And the more creative you are, the better ability you have to see those correspondences. So you might, in your dream, see, make something up, a ship coming in to port, and the next day a friend offers you a new job. Well, if you're not very creative, you go, well, there's nothing like a ship coming into port and a new job. And if you are creative, you go, oh, yes, but a ship coming in, that represents opportunity in my dream world. And look, I was offered this job, a radical change, and so on. So it is, it makes sense that people who have these sorts of experiences, and they tend to then underpin belief, have those sorts of kind of ways of seeing the world. But it's not very related to, quotes, intelligence or education levels. It goes across gender, goes across age, goes across time. I mean, belief in ESP, you go back to Ryan's day, it's not far off of what it is now. So in the UK, we hit about 50%, 55% consistently for belief in ESP, about 40% for ghosts. We like our ghosts over here. And those figures haven't changed much when I was looking at it for about a decade.
There's a new study. I don't know if you saw a really hot off the press study conducted by Paul Silva and his colleagues on who seems to enjoy magic.
Yes.
And they found two very different kinds of people. So, you on one hand, you get the skeptical, rational folk is a subclass. And then you also, on the other hand, you get what you're describing, the more superstitious, paranormal folk. But they both seem to equally love it, but for different reasons, probably.
Well, I think that's true of performing, isn't it? I mean, you know that when you do a magic trick, there are some people that if you paid them money, they wouldn't want to know what the solution is. They enjoy that magical experience, and other people would pay you for the solution.
Right.
And so, and of course, as a magician, you have to appeal to both sets. And I think magicians themselves tend to fall into the latter class. They tend to be about method, how things are done. That was clever, and so on. And I think they forget that most people are in the former. They just want to have this wonderful, pleasant, entertaining experience. And so there's a bit of a mismatch sometimes between audience and performer. And the other problem, I think, from a can I solve it point of view, is the whole point of magic is you can't. To use that phrase, it gives you a stone in your shoe. You go around thinking, well, it can't be that, it can't be that. And it's very clever because it's not only an individual can't solve it. If you're doing close-up magic at a table and you walk away, everyone's going to be talking about that trick. As a group, they can't solve it otherwise. Otherwise it's a bad trick. So it's very interesting from a problem-solving point of view. But for me, the challenge, and this goes right back to how to influence and influence people, is how do you do magic and remain likable? I mean, the contract is, there's this trick I'm doing, and people go, right, well, what's the secret? And you say, I can't tell you. And they're supposed to like you for that. I mean, we don't like people that don't tell us secrets. I cannot perform for my friends. I mean, I find it simply impossible because they're just going to go, well, how's that done? And as a friend, I would normally tell them anything like that. And instead I have to go, oh, I can't tell you. So I think that's the challenge for magicians is actually to remain likable whilst doing this weird activity of essentially lying to people.
Yeah, I think being likable is like half the battle of being a good magician, especially if you do walk around, and getting people receptive to even just.
I think it's more than half the battle.
Yeah, maybe.
Getting people into that state of mind where they don't care in a good way how the trick is done is absolutely key to it. Magicians are entertainers, and it's difficult.
I don't know. What are your thoughts? What do you think of mentalism? I'm obsessed. I love mentalism, and and just personally, it suits me, and I find it gets a better reaction than like card tricks. But I just find that nothing beats the reaction of like, hey, can I guess your favorite movie?
Why do you think that is?
Let's talk about that. Let's nerd out about that. There's some people, I've asked people why they're like, this is something different. They're like, this is something else that I liked all those other card tricks you did. And I like, you made a card go through a whole, case. Yeah, that's nice. Okay. But like, I guess someone's first crush, people feel like that's something different. It's not magic anymore. It's just pure mind reading. And it takes it to a different realm. Even though I'm honest, I don't say like, oh, I'm psychic. I don't say I'm psychic. But it almost sometimes when I say that, some people who are really into that stuff will be like, well, that's what a psychic would say. Or that's what a magician would say who's actually psychic. I don't know why that is what that would say. But anyway, so there's something else going on with mentalism in terms of how it hits people at a personal, like a deep personal, because you're like going into their minds apparently. And that's different than the separation you have from magic.
I think that's right. I think there's a few things. One is you're right. It's normally personal to them. But also, I think it's more plausible. I mean, if you're going to put a coin in your hand and make it disappear, no one actually believes that. Maybe at some point in history they did, but they don't now. Mentalism, the idea that somebody could read my mind, whether you believe in ESP, you believe that. If it's a psychological illusion, I'm looking at your body language. Well, we know that we give off tells in body language. We read each other's body language all the time. Maybe this person is just super good at it. So in a sense, it removes exactly what I was talking about before, which is the stone in the shoe, that they have got an explanation, so they don't look for any other explanation. And so I think that's part of the appeal. I don't think it's the same experience as seeing physical magic. I think it's a different experience because you're seeing something remarkable rather than something impossible. You have got working hypotheses in your head. That may not be what the performer is doing, of course, but still, it feels like, to me, it's closer. If you went to the circus, I'm going to the circus in 2 days. If I go to the circus and there's flying trapeze people and they do a triple, I go, oh my goodness, I know you've dedicated your life to that. And I believe that is a genuine display of physical skill. And I go, oh my goodness, incredible. If I found out, actually, they're just on a rig and they're being held up by wires, it's not really a triple, I would be devastated.
Yes.
That's not the experience I'm paying for. And I think mentalism kind of occupies that space. It's like I'm seeing something remarkable. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But it's very different to magic, which we know is a trick. I think that's why, in part, why people like it. So it's a very powerful tool. It's been around for a long time in one form or another, and it always piggybacks on public belief. You know, when public did believe in spirits and seances, well, the mentalists were doing that. And it's ESP, they were doing that. Now it's all about body language. Well, they're doing that. So it has an interesting kind of evolution, I think.
Yeah, but it's very culturally relevant right now with the telepathy tapes, the telepathy tapes in popularity. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like mentalism is like cool again. You know, it's like it's back. Yeah. We're back, baby.
And also depend on performers. I mean, over here we have Darren Brown. That style of magic was not particularly popular until Darren came along. He's an astonishing performer, and suddenly you see everybody doing all that kind of stuff.
Do you know Darren?
Very well. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I'm in his first special. If you look back to the very first one,
really,
it's filmed at the university. Yeah, he does a stunt demonstration with twins. I'm there, and then I helped out with a couple of the TV programs and stuff. And he's astonishing. I invented a mind reading item, and I don't do mentalism, but I showed it to him, and it was involved a book. And he took it off me. Performed it himself in 2 seconds and fooled me with my own creation. I mean, he's really, really good. So yeah, it's great.
He's so intelligent, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. When I used to teach cognitive psychology at NYU, I would show videos of his stuff, and that was way back when I didn't even know anything about how he actually did his stuff. So he actually fooled me. He actually fooled me in a sense. Like, I used an example of like how we can really influence people's minds by meticulously, like putting things in the environment. You know what I'm saying. But so anyway,
but once you've got that explanation, so I've you and I have been to a lot of magic conventions. There's a very big one coming up next week in this country at Blackpool. I will see Blackpool. I will see stuff there. I'm not going this year, but when I normally go, I will see stuff that blows me away. I've got no idea. I've been in magic 40 years. I've got no idea how it's done. When I go and see psychics work, and I've sat in on some genuine seances, it's awful. The trickery is awful. And the reason is it doesn't need to be any better because no one's looking for a trick. They're there to commune with the spirits.
So true.
And so they don't need to be good magicians or good tricksters. It's the magicians that need to be because everyone knows they're watching a magic trick. So it's kind of interesting that the power of that frame of saying, actually, this is genuine or this is body language or whatever it is, it prevents people going any deeper where magicians don't have that frame. They're saying it's a trick, and everyone's going, good, this is a challenge. I'll try and work that out then.
What a terrific point. People are seances, what are they called? Psychic seances? What are they called?
I've done loads of fake seances, probably 100 sort of darkroom seances. I love doing them.
Well, the ones that professionally, do it, they have it easier because their audience is coming to them with just, no question, this is true.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's far better than having to perform at a drunk, bar with the skeptical, girl who's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to change my mind now and try to fool you.
Totally. And you go along to a spiritualist church or a psychic reading, whatever. People are there to be receptive when you say, whatever. They're doing all the work for you. Go along for a palm reading or a crystal ball reading, whatever it is. They are there to do that work for you. Magicians would never get away with that stuff because they're attending it. And it can be the same people. The same people that 1 minute will be believing of a palm reading will be very skeptical of magicians trying to solve the trick the next because they've switched frames.
That is so funny and interesting about humans, just that fact. Yeah. So you don't think we can commune with the dead?
I haven't seen convincing evidence of that. I've seen convincing evidence of a lack of communicating with the dead. Wow. We've done a lot of fake seances that goes back. There's a magician actor in this country called Andy Nyman who works with Darren a lot, actually. And some of Andy's first shows with me doing these fake seances when we were both very, very young performers. And it was incredible. We'd have these sort of luminous objects moving around in the dark and so on. Yeah. So much fun using traditional Victorian methods that are very simple but still fool people, because when you're in the darkness, you're very vulnerable. You can't tell how far away objects are or where people are and so on. Wow. So, yeah, had a lot of fun doing that stuff.
My friend Spencer Greenberg did a large-scale study about astrologists and wanted to know, do they really believe this is true? And he found that an awful lot, maybe even the majority, I mean, they really believe in what they're not like. It's not like they're trying to pull a fast one over others. And so I said, now do psychics is what I said. He's like, hey, that'll be my next study. But I want to know if you have any insight into that, because I have some friends who are mediums. They're professional mediums, and I don't feel like it's my place. Like I get the sense when I talk to them, they actually believe they are mediums. They are communicating with the dead. So I don't think all mediums are, doing the trickery and conscious of their trickery. Is there something else going on where, like I don't know what it is. Like in my head, it just seems so obvious that if I'm doing trickery, I know I'm doing trickery. I can't imagine myself doing trickery not knowing it. But there seems to be a case where a lot of psychics believe they're psychics. And why do they believe they're psychics? Yeah.
Well, they're not doing tricks per se. Most of those were doing readings. I think when you get to, like, say, physical phenomena, the seance room phenomena, then they are tricking people and they would know about that. Most of them are doing readings. So what happens there? Somebody sits down, you come up with a reading, and the person goes, my goodness, that's incredibly accurate.
Right.
And you could easily see how that gets internalized of, I've got some kind of gift then because the feedback you're getting. So my answer used to be, up until a few months ago, I think the vast majority of them believe their own kind of abilities. Yeah. However, I then met a friend of mine who works as a professional psychic. And he said, you're kidding me. He said, I go out every day, as all my colleagues do. We say the same thing to people. All the readings are the same. He said, I might put a minor variation in, but people are endorsing the same reading night after night. There's no way we're doing that and not realizing that most of it is baloney. So he flipped me the other way. He said, what keeps you going are the amazing hits. He said, sometimes you go into a weird space and you get hit, and that's what convinces you. But most of the time, he said, you know what? We're all just saying the same thing and getting the same feedback. So I don't know. I then flipped back a little bit.
Why? This is fascinating insight. So thank you. Why are they ethically okay with that?
Well, I mean, mentalists, you ask the same question of them. You know, they are often, they don't say to people, this is a trick. They'll say, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and try and keep people away from the trick word.
But psychics aren't entertainers.
Well, that's the greater good argument. So the argument is for some greater, well, you could say within an entertainment context, it's all fine. Right. And psychics would probably say the same. A lot of it is within entertainment. Or I suspect most of them would do a greater good argument, which is that it's hard in this country to get access to a therapist. Most people can't afford that. It's not on the national health system over here. They give somebody attention for 20 minutes and it helps that person. And the evidence is that I think they're right, that most people enjoy going to psychics and find it helpful when you do those kind of studies. That's probably ethically where they go, is my guess.
I see. So you really don't think there's any evidence at all for the idea that psychic ability is an individual differences variable, that there really are some people on this planet that have this gift?
I wouldn't say there's no evidence. There's loads of evidence. You look at upstairs, I've got all the parapsychology journals. They're full of evidence. The question is it convincing? I don't find it particularly convincing, but who knows? Maybe that will change in the future. There's certainly an argument there for carrying out those studies. If you're getting into psychically gifted people, those that can sit down and instantly do this stuff, and it's a very large effect size, well, that's very easy to test. And I find those tests of the gifted psychics completely unconvincing.
Wow.
So most of the lab evidence is like a psychology experiment. You test 200 people, you put all their results together. It's slightly better than chance. That's very different to, the psychic that goes, I can turn this thing on, tell you all about your future. Dead easy to test and normally completely unconvincing, the results of those tests.
Oh, it's a little sad. Like, I want there to be, I want this to exist. I think it'd be interesting.
Well, do you though? I mean, it would change. Some people got different worldviews. I mean, if you believe in life after death, I guess that's kind of comforting. This is what's nice about the future, is that it's uncertain. If I knew what the future held for you, and it was awful, and I told you that, and you knew I was correct, I'm not certain that's an uplifting.
That's true.
kind of message.
I think that there is an individual differences variable that's relevant here, even though it's not psychic ability, and that was the major topic of my PhD, was implicit learning. I think there are some people who really do. Like, I was curious, like, IQ tests have been studied, but is there an implicit intelligence that are some people generally better at unconscious pattern recognition or non-conscious pattern recognition? How does that correlate with IQ? So that was my cognition paper, was showing a zero correlation between the two.
Yeah.
And I was like the first to really adopt those implicit learning tasks in the cognitive science literature for individual differences. So that was my dissertation.
So you tell people what's an implicit learning task?
One would be like the serial reaction time task, where you have people just press a key corresponding to a letter as fast as they can, and we look at reaction times, and we see that some people over time, without any understanding or recognition of it, because you debrief them at the end, you're like, do you think you learned anything from this boring ass task? And they're like, no. And some of them actually were much quicker at learning a reoccurring, like, very complex pattern.
Yes.
And that's just one example. Another thing would be like Arthur Reber's artificial grammar learning task, where some people, after being exposed to lots of different a fake grammar, actually learn the principles better. Statistical learning, is how other people would in the literature describe it.
Years ago, I don't know if this counts or not, it's not my field. I did an ESP thing with an entire class where I had a deck of cards. I stacked red, red, black, red, red, black, red, red, black. And as people were trying to guess it, and they didn't pick up on the pattern consciously, but they slowly got better as a group.
Yes.
And then slowly thought that and you can see individual differences in there. We never looked at it, but they slowly thought there was ESP emerging because on different groups of trials, they were slowly getting better. So I don't know if that would count as the same thing.
It would. It really would. That could have been another task that, we added to our battery. So at the general level, people show there's significant effects of implicit and there are individual differences. Both are true at the same time. So I am just thinking that I really do think there are some people who are more intuitive, whatever, like I think that scientifically that means something. That's not like a woo-woo statement. And I don't think it's just the high intelligence people. This is something I wanted to point out, is like, so I have something called the dual process theory of intelligence. So I think that with psychics, with, a lot of these mediums that I meet, I have a friend who's a medium, for instance, and I find her the most, like, she's like emotionally open in an incredible way. She is just so open. And we found a correlation between implicit learning and openness to experience, the personality trait.
Which was the one I was talking about before with belief in psychic stuff. Yeah.
Yes. But you meet someone with 3-4 standard deviations above the mean and openness to experience, and it is a different kind of person.
Yes.
And I'm not saying this is magical, but I'm saying there is something there that I think we could do well to appreciate more as an individual difference is variable, and it's a talent, it's a skill, even though we don't necessarily have to go to their psychic level, but they're picking up on lots of nuances.
Yeah, I think that's right. But my understanding is you'd only have those intuitive thoughts and trust them when you've got a lot of experience with whatever it is that you're doing. Yeah. And so I've given talks on psychology. I give a lot of public talks. And in fact, there's one particular talk on luck I've given hundreds of times.
I know.
During that talk, often I'll get an intuitive feeling about that audience that I need to do this, or there's going to be a problem coming up. And it's normally always right. Well, that's because I've given the talk so many times. I often say, when I teach public speaking, silence is odd in a group because bored silence sounds different to interested silence. And if you've given a lot of talks, you can hear the difference. There's a very subtle difference in bored silence and interest. So intuitively, I'll go, I have to make this more interesting now because I can hear the group are bored. Or actually, I can take them down that route because I can hear that they're interested. I'm not thinking about that. I'm just intuitively doing it. So, yeah, absolutely. I think intuition is really important. I think perhaps at least half my ideas for studies and books and so on come to me in dreams. I often wake up and write down dreams because that's where they manifest themselves, solutions to problems and so on. So we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Are you familiar with Diane Powell's research?
No, I'm not. No.
Diane Hennessy Powell, she studies the science of ESP, and she's one of the ones who was featured on the Telepathy Tapes podcast. I just had her on my podcast, so I could send you my chat with her as well. She seems to be pretty. I guess we both describe ourselves as open skeptics, which I think is probably the right way to be. Obviously, I think it's the right way to be if that's where I am. But Dr. Powell, she really believes, there's something here. But when we talked about this, picking up the nuances stuff, it's interesting because a lot of these, there's something special here with autistic savants that I think is worth further investigation because they're completely nonverbal. I think their implicit learning ability is, I did some research at Cambridge, University of Cambridge, on this topic. And I'm gonna collaborate with Simon Baron Cohen to test some of these kids, from the telepathy tapes, because I think there's something here. It's really interesting where if you're completely nonverbal, completely nonverbal, and you really hone this incredible ability to just be observant to regularities and patterns, you're not like encumbered by language so much. You can become like, talk about Erickson, 10 years of deliberate practice. You could become such an expert in something that it can really blow people's minds, and you found in the telepathy tapes that it's usually the mother or the person that the child knows. As soon as you bring in like a stranger, they can't read their mind anymore. I kept bringing that up. I was like, I want to double click on that because there's something about that. Like if I spend enough time with anyone, you start to find like couples start to complete each other's sentences. They don't call themselves psychics, right? They start to know each other so well. So I think there's something going on there where like these kids get to know their mom so well.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't know that work. The stuff I do know, which is about psychology of lying, is actually the opposite, which is that when people know each other well, they are less able to detect lies in their partners and long-term friends. But the reason for that is they exhibit what's called a truth bias, which is they don't want to believe their partners and friends are lying. So they always say truth on it. So it's slightly different. But yeah, I guess that could be true. It's an interesting, exciting idea. And yeah, look into it. Go for it. I mean, that gets full circle. That feels like a meaningful thing to do one way or another.
Yeah, for sure. Just to conclude this interview with success in life, which
we haven't touched on at all after saying we would do at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it now for a couple minutes, because I am really fascinated with the thread that runs through multiple of your books, and that's from positive thinking to positive action. I think that summarizes a lot of the thread that runs through. Like, just act already, And can you kind of explain to me the difference between positive thinking and positive acting? And are you kind of, why do you think action is so important for success in life?
I just think as humans, we learn by doing stuff. There's only so many simulations you can run in your head. So for me, if I'm inventing a magic trick, I can think of something, I think that'll work, a small change here, or if I'm doing one of the Quirkology videos. But you know what? Nothing beats getting out a deck of cards or whatever it is and doing it for a real person. And you suddenly find out that thing that you thought would fly, they detect in 2 seconds, and something else that you thought would be awful actually turns out to be brilliant. We learn by doing. And if you look at some of the most successful people, they do. They don't just talk about it. Many, 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 many years ago, I sat up in a treehouse with a good friend of mine, Adrian Owen, now a very famous neuroscientist.
I know Adrian.
Adrian and I go back to UCL. We were undergraduates together, and we shared a flat together. We did the stuff in Covent Garden was joint with Adrian. It was double act.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So we sat there, and we sat up in this treehouse on our first holiday together in the south of England. And we were talking about various plans, and we made a pact, which is that if we mentioned an idea 3 times, we had to do it. And that both of us have stayed with that throughout our lives. It's been 30-something years now. That if you say something 3 times, you have to do it instead of just talking about it. And it's a very good formula for success, because you find out this thing's a terrible idea or a good idea or whatever, but you get out there. And when you get out there, you attract other people because they find out what you're doing, other like-minded people who help you or whatever. So I'm a huge fan of doing, where a lot of psychology self-help is about thinking and thinking differently, where I think, you know what, just get on and do it. Worst that happens is you'll fail and you'll learn something. I did a show at the Edinburgh Fringe here last year in August, and I don't normally do magic shows. Well, the first one wasn't my best show, to put it mildly, but you have to do 10 in a row. And by the time you hit show 10, it was pretty tight. And I could have sat at home imagining this wonderful show and how funny and hilarious it was going to be. Doesn't matter until you're out there doing it. That's when you learn.
Such a deep truth. That is the thread that runs through so much of your discussions about happiness. And I'm super interested in integrating your work with Darren Brown's work on happiness, the psychology of happiness.
Yeah.
I think
yes.
There's a lot of commonalities there.
Yes. Yeah. And it's great. And I think, happiness is slightly different to success. But the two of them are heavily related, but slightly different. But I just think we're very good at, whatever it is. So I always say to my students, there'll be some passion you've got in life, and you can pursue psychology if you want, but you'll be far more successful if you pursue that passion. And pursue means get out there and do it. Don't just think about it or talk about it or whatever. And what's great about psychology is you often combine those two. If you love horse riding, well, you can do the psychology of horse riding. If you love running, do the psychology of running. And you'll be the only person in the world that has those those two things combined. Therefore, you'll become an expert and you'll spend longer doing it than anyone else. I spent all my life looking at psychology and magic. It doesn't feel like work. I love doing it. That idea of doing that psychology and magic stuff actually comes from Max Maven. I went to the Magic Castle when I was about 18, 19. And I said to Max, I'm thinking of being a professional magician. He said, what's your other option? I said, psychologist. And he said, combine them. You'll become one of the very few people looking at psychology and magic. Boy, that was great advice.
I feel the same. You're giving me chills. You're giving me chills. You're a very inspirational figure to me. You really are, Richard. I feel the same way. I feel like there's so many mentalists out, specifically mentalism. There's so many mentalists out there who say they do psychology, but the lane of psychologists, like legit psychologists who do mentalism, I feel like is much smaller. And so for me, that's exciting. You know, there's a lot of potential there to use mentalism to like unlock people's potential, or to like show people that, like, you know, there's, you know, the reach of their mind, as J.B. Ryan would say.
Yes. Well, probably every psychology paper is potentially a good presentation for a piece of mentalism, but you have to know that stuff. But it goes beyond, you know, magic. I think, you know, every single undergraduate will have some passion, and often it's not psychology, it's something outside of that. And their eyes light up, and they start to talk in a really energetic way when they're talking about that. And tapping that energy and bringing it into psychology, you know, is one way of making it meaningful, and probably means they're going to have a far more successful career. Yeah, working on a new Fringe show, which will be out in August. For magicians listening, I'll be over at FISM in July in Italy, which is a sort of week-long celebration of magic. And also doing some other work, which will be published very, very soon. I've just seen the paper before it goes into the journal, looking at optical illusions, particularly ambiguous optical illusions, the kind of duck rabbit things. There's a new take on those. So, yes, still doing all this stuff after all these years. But thank you for your kind comments throughout this. It's very kind.
Oh, of course, I mean them, and I love your videos on YouTube. So everyone, check out Richard's escape from prison. Check out Richard's perception. You like playing and manipulating perception by putting things closer and farther away. And
it's all on the Quirkology channel. We did that in the sort of infancy of YouTube, actually. And now I meet people in their sort of mid-20s and go, "Oh, I watched it as a kid." Makes me feel terribly old, but delighted that it's inspiring anyone.
Well, anyway, thank you so much, Richard. Thank you for your time today. Thanks for being on the podcast. And I'll catch you on the secret magic Facebook groups.
Yeah, please do. Lovely to chat to you. Thank you.